In our last video, we pulled the motor and trans out of project bedding. Now we're ready to get down to the installations. And the first one we're doing is one you guys have asked about for a long time, and that is the installation of a complete chassis harness from Painless Performance. While wiring is intimidating for a lot of people, the goal of Painless Performance products is to make it as easy as possible. Now, Painless has all kinds of different options out there. They have different switch harnesses, they have universal muscle car harnesses, but these are going to be their chassis-specific harnesses. Now, these are going to be available for your 65 through 66 Mustang, your 67 through 68, as well as your 69 through 70. This is going to be a 22-circuit complete replacement harness. So you can remove every piece of factory wiring from your classic Mustang and replace it with the Painless harness. So we're going to pop the box open and kind of go through everything here, but why Painless Performance? Well, Painless is an American-made company. I love using USA products when possible, and they use factory wiring colors and a lot of the factory connectors. So this is actually going to make sense if you're familiar with the factory wiring, but even if you're not, everything is clearly labeled and it will plug into the factory plugs. The first thing you want to do when you open your box is actually exactly what they tell you to do on this piece of paper. I'll save you from reading it, but basically it says go through the manual, go through the harness, lay it out, and look at everything before you begin the installation. And I'm going to start laying out some of the smaller harness, but you get pigtails for your wipers, your heater switch, there's your cluster, and there's two different ones, obviously, if you have a 65 or 66 cluster, and if you're looking to convert, now is the perfect time to do it. Lots of accessory wires in there, a whole thing of quality connectors, put everything together, and the meat of the whole thing is the actual harness. I'm going to show you the instruction manual and kind of go through it a little bit, but before we get into that, talk about a few reasons you'd want to do this. Why would you want to rip all the factory wiring out of your Mustang and install this chassis harness? One of the main reasons is upgradability. Your factory wiring is going to be 55 plus years old at this point. It's going to be frail, it's going to be brittle, there are going to be all kinds of issues, and chasing electrical gremlins is a nightmare. Now, if you're worried about originality, we have original style harnesses. You can replace anything you want in your car with that style harness. The benefit of this, especially for a build like ours, is that everything's going to be new, fresh wire, and this is expandable. There's extra fuses, there's extra circuits. We want to add electric ignition or an EFI kit or anything like that. This will allow us to much more easily do that versus the factory harness. One of the reasons I like using Painless Performance products is they have one of the best manuals out when it comes to installation. Like I said, wiring is intimidating for a lot of people, but this makes it as straightforward as possible. When you go through it, I'll skip all the boring stuff in the beginning, contents. Obviously, you want to read all that, though. Make sure you have everything you're supposed to in here. But when you go in, high color photographs showing you where to install fuse block, where factory pass-throughs go, where your new wires should pass through, the kind of tools you need, and then all kinds of detailed wire diagrams showing you how everything connects, where the connections go. And like I said, all the wiring is going to be factory colors, and all of it is going to use the factory style connectors, and the wires are even labeled. So if you have a wire and you're not even sure what it does, every one of them has the label right on the wire showing that. I'm going to show you that in a second. But again, like you said, everything you need to be able to do this yourself at home is all right here in the manual. And this is something, if you've never done it before, open the box, pull this manual out, spend a night or two, just sit down and read it at night, go over everything. It'll make it a lot easier once you get into the installation to know where everything goes. This is definitely something, though, that you should be comfortable doing yourself. All right, start pulling the harness apart now and sort of go through everything with you here. That there is a lot to it, but it will all make sense. Yeah. No, I promise it will. We laid the harness out a little bit here, and you can see, like I said, it's a 22-circuit harness with 12 fuses. You have a horn relay as well as an accessory relay, and then you get all the connections for your blower motor, your wipers, ignition, headlights and taillights, voltage regulator, your turn signals, your radio, and it's going to be both a hot and a switch for that, along with wires for all your dimmers, cigarette lighter, and every other accessory on the vehicle. And again, the nice thing with this is it is expandable. You have a fan relay to run an electric fan. You have additional switched and constant circuits, so you can add additional electronics to your classic Mustang. Like I said, once you familiarize yourself with the actual owner's manual, lay the harness out and kind of get a feel where everything's going to go. You got your fuse block. This is going to mount on the driver's side above the kick panel. And then basically you've got your taillight harness. This is going to be all of your dash wiring, and it's going to be the harness that goes under the hood. And you can start with whatever you want. I mean, obviously the first step of the installation is to remove all the factory wiring, but you can start with the interior and then add the forward stuff, or you can start with this, get it back to the firewall, and then work on the main harness. In our case, we're actually going to install the main harness first in the vehicle and then work our way outward towards both front and back of the car. Like I said before, Painless goes through great detail to make this as easy as possible, and all the wires are labeled, and it actually comes with additional labels you can use any way you see fit. But as you can see right here, it has the number, and it explains where it goes. So this is from the fuse block to an electric choke if you do have one on your carburetor. And again, all the wires are labeled, they're all factory colors, and whenever possible, they're gonna have factory connectors. Now, in a few cases where there is no factory connector available, it does come with wiring, so you can use your original connector for the installation. Now, I mentioned before, if you did want to change clusters, this is the absolute perfect time to do it, but it does come with wiring for both. So if you like that long style 65 cluster, the wiring is included for that. If you want to go to the more modern 5-gauge cluster, the harness is also included for that, along with brand new bulbs for the cluster display. Like I mentioned before, if you want to upgrade to the 5-gauge cluster, now is the perfect time to do it, and the wiring for the 66 style is included in the kit. But if you do like your original still, it does come with wiring for that original style 65 cluster. Both harnesses include brand new bulbs to light up your factory gauges. We talked about the fuse block before. We'll take a closer look at it now though. Pop the cover off. You can see all modern fuses. No more glass fuses, no more dealing with the vintage style ones. And again, there's accessories on here that aren't used for the factory wiring. It gives you the ability to add more accessories to your vehicle. So before you start removing your factory harness, they do include these labels. So if you do want to label all your factory wires, because there are a few plugs that you will need, so this can make it a little bit easier, but this also can be time consuming. So we'll call this an option. But if you do decide you want to label everything as it comes apart, the labels are included by Painless. So here, Brendan back as usual to help me with the installation of this wiring harness. And the first step, pretty obvious, take the battery, just take it out of the car, or at least disconnect it, but the best thing, just get it out of the way. Then you're gonna go through the car and literally rip out every piece of factory wiring. So anything that goes to anywhere, basically remove it, get it out of the way. Brendan's gonna start under the hood. I'm gonna start by actually popping out the headlights so we have access to headlight harnesses. We're just gonna work our way back and pull all the wires out of the car. Okay, so I'm glad we don't care about our paint job.
The last headlight out, we can get the rest of the front engine harness out.
I'm going to start on the cluster now. Now, if you're trying to keep the factory harness intact for whatever reason, don't do this. But if you're not worried about cutting it, I actually like to cut off the grounds from the factory and just leave them there. That way later, if we need a ground, the hardware is there, we know where the factory grounds were. All the wiring harnesses up here in the dash basically just plug in, except remember the ignition switch harness will have a little nut in the back you gotta remove.
Okay, now Bill and I got the rest of the dash wiring all pulled out. Just grab your harness, make sure you have all your connections disconnected, and then pull that old harness out. Now for the last thing we have to do, just pull the rear harness. This is the rear harness in the driver's side kick panel. All we're gonna do is disconnect everything from the back and just pull it right through. For the rear of the harness, it's very easy. There's these little metal tabs around the body of it that you just have to unbend to get the harness out from the body. Just take a flat blade screwdriver, bend the tab a little bit, and the harness pops out. And then just go around the whole car. Now that you have everything disconnected in the trunk, all like I said, just grab the harness and pull. Yep, it would have gone too simple. Now with the trunk harness all out, we have all the harness out of our Mustang. Let's get on to the new harness.
Before we get too far into the installation of the harness, we're actually going to wire up the cluster itself. And again, we have a 65 cluster. Make sure you use the correct harness, whichever cluster you are going with. And again, if you're looking to convert to that 66 style, now is the perfect time to do it. But we're actually going to stick with our factory cluster for now, as we do have other plans in the future. We're going to start by wiring this up. We're going to start over here with the fuel gauge. And again, like you can see, the wiring is all labeled. Next, we're going to do the two panel lamps for this side. They're easy to tell. Just look for the blue insert. They're the ones that are just the lights. And we'll do the oil and alternator. Now we'll do the other two panel lights while we're over here. Next, the turn signal indicator. Again, there's only a single one on the 65. Then the high beam right here. Now the constant voltage regulator. One is a female, one is a male plug. So don't worry about it, makes it easy to make sure you put it in the right spot. And finally the temp gauge. And our cluster is all wired up. I was originally going to start inside the car. Now I'm going to start actually in the front of the car and just work my way towards the back. So first thing we're going to do is the under hood harness. Now what you want to do, grab your original harness, find the plug for the voltage regulator, and we're going to steal this capacitor. That should be the only thing we actually need off that part of the harness. So this is the plug from Painless for the voltage regulator. This yellow wire coming off will go to the capacitor. And still the plug for the voltage regulator, this black wire here, we get a ring terminal. This will actually ground to one of the mounting bolts. Okay, now go to each individual headlight plug. You're going to do this twice. You have your headlight plug, this is your parking light plug. This is actually the ground. We're going to have to put, again, one of the female butt connectors on each one of these. The other connector we have to install for the harness under the hood is going to be for this gray wire here, which is going to go to our washer pump. That's going to be a spade connector, a female spade. We're actually not going to put that on until it's in the car, so we may want to shorten this wire up, so we'll leave that off for now. All right, now we're going to actually start laying out the cluster in the car. Now we know these go to the dash. So we're going to put this kind of just up over here, out of the way. What I'm going to do here is just get everything kind of roughly where it goes. Voltage regulator and a headlight will be on this side. And then this is going to go across. Put that there for now. There's our horns. This will be the headlight on this side. And these wires will go back to the alternator. So we're going to take the harness here, headlights and parking lights. Put this through this opening here. The voltage regulator here, we're going to plug this in. Now we'll remount the regulator. This wire here gets grounded with the top mounting bolt. And as we're removing the harness, our radio suppressor actually snapped off, so we'll have to replace this. But basically, this is just gonna mount on the bottom bolt, just like that. The wiring for the washer hose wire is actually not that bad, so we're just gonna put the terminal on this. Plug that right in like that. I'll take our horn wire and fish that through the hole right here. And plug that in the horn. And same thing over on this side. I'm actually going to use this ground location here for the headlight ground for this side as well. Instead of making an extra hole, but you can always make an extra ground if you want to. I'm going to use this ground right here to ground the headlight harness over on this side. And then feed the headlight parking light harness again through here. And the last wire left on the harness that goes across the top of the radiator is going to be this gray wire here. This is for an electric fan. So this is basically, if you add an electric fan, this is to power that, to power the relay to turn it on. So again, we're not using it this time. You can tie it off, hide it out of the way, put it wherever you want. So these are the wires for the headlight and the parking lights. And the parking light harness is basically down underneath. This you'll want to fish up and then make these connections. There's actually a tiny little hole back here. It's gonna be very, very hard to see. We're gonna fish the wires up so we can make all of our connections. And then obviously we're gonna leave this off for now as we're gonna change headlights. But that is your factory style headlight plug. That'll plug right into it. And we can make the parking light connections. Tuck these wires safely out of the way behind the headlight. Do the same thing on the other side. This last group of wires here is going to be for the alternator, which obviously we don't have right now. We're just going to leave these out of the way. You notice the harness, I haven't tied it up, I haven't wrapped it, I haven't done that yet. All that happens at the end. The first thing we're going to do is make all your connections, figure out where everything's going to go, lay it out, get it in place, and then when you're done, go through and clean it up. The harness we just installed has to go through this opening down here in the corner, and this hole here has to be opened up as well. Both have to be opened up to 1.25 inches to use the supplied plates. Now it's gonna be tough to get in there. What we're gonna try to do though is use a hole saw to open them up a little bit, and then we'll use a grinder and just kind of grind it out. I'm gonna put the harnesses through the grommet that's supplied. Lubrication makes this a little bit easier. It is going to be a tight fit through here. I'll put them through the plate as well. Then take the wiring harnesses, fish them in the interior. And we'll come back later and screw that plate down. So we're back inside the car. We're going to start on the main harness. The first thing you have to do is mount your fuse block. Now basically what you want to do is make sure your kick panel's in place, and you're going to mount it on the metal right basically above it. So right in that neighborhood there. That includes self-tapping screws to install it with. It's going to be a little tough to get in there, very, very hard to see on camera. But yeah, basically get in there and screw it in place. All right, now we're ready to begin actually installing the main painless harness. Now this is the fuse block. We just installed the mount for that. That's gonna go up there on the side. Then you kind of want to get a feel, kind of separate everything here and get a feel for where everything else is gonna go. Let's see, this is door jamb, switch, accessories, headlight. So basically this harness here These will connect to those two harnesses we just fed through our firewall. We have the tail light harness separated here. Basically, I said, just kind of lay it out, sort of get a feel for where everything is going to go. Should be ignition. Actually, it's our headlight switch. There's our ignition switch. And then we're going to have a harness here. This is actually going to go out through the other hole we drilled in the firewall. This will go out to the engine bay. So this is our engine bay harness. Our dash cluster will connect there. There's our fuse. This is going to be some lighting. And then this here will go back to our taillights. All right, so we're ready to start fishing the main harness here. We have this section. This is the section that's going to go across the dash. This has all of our connections here for ignition, wipers, headlights. This stuff's going to go over further, dome light, and then this harness is what's going to actually go to the engine bay. So what you want to do is kind of fish this over the column and sort of get the wires going in that direction, because if not, it'll be really tough to get the fuse box up into place. So we're going to start connecting now the switch. We're going to start with the wiper, then do the headlights, and then finally the ignition switch. The wiper switch you want to pull out of the car to do this. If you've never done it before, there's a small set screw on the bottom that will allow you to actually pull the knob off. Then we sell a tool to get this ring off, but a lot of times you get in there with a set of pliers and actually just kind of turn it, and that will allow you to take it out of the dash. So the wiring for this part is going to depend on whether you have a single speed or a 2-speed wiper. R65 has the 2-speed. Easiest way to tell is there's a lot more. There's only going to be basically 5 connections on a single speed, where obviously there's a lot more on the double speed. Now, the wiring instructions included by Painless will tell you where all these go. But you want to grab this harness here. This is your wiper accessory harness. It actually comes in its own bag. It's not part of the main harness. Now, the first 5 connections are going to be this accessory harness, and there'll be 2 connections from the main wiring harness. And the last 2 connections will be right here with the headlight wiring. It's going to be the ground and then a positive lead here. Before you put this back in and make your life a little bit easier, grab your headlight switch. And once your headlight switch is installed, now you can reinstall your wiper switch. We're going to remove this screw here for this factory ground we left earlier. We're going to make that ground just a little bit better, take some of the paint off. So there's two grounds right here from the main harness, and this one from the wipers. We're all going to ground to the spot. This is the other side of the wiper harness here. We're going to fish this down below just so you can see where we're connecting here. Here, match up the factory colors. So you got white and red. We're going to match that up to our white and red. This side as well. And the other 2 pigtails from the harness connect to these 2 blade terminals on the actual wiper motor itself. Now some more wire fishing here. We're gonna get the rest of the harness behind the rest of the support of the dash. Next, we'll connect the ignition switch wiring. This will plug right into the back of the factory ignition switch. Then this gray wire, that's an accessory 12 volt. It'll go on the stud in the middle. Take the wiring harness here for your turn signal switch from the bottom of the column. Make sure it goes over your brake release. These two plugs over here, these will connect to the bottom of your column. This is for your turn signal switch. Okay, now we're gonna pull the entire harness up into place, mount it to the bracket. All right, now a few more connections down here kind of under the dash. This black switch here goes to your foot-mounted high beam switch. These two connect to the two that we fished through from the wiring harness under the hood earlier. These two here will go to the brake light switch. And we have two more in the main harness over here to go to the door jamb switch. Push these up through. These go to the brake light switch. Plug this in to your high beam indicator. Then we're going to take our flasher back behind the vent, put that in the factory location. All right, so working back under the dash, we've got a few more wires here that have no termination on them. These two are for an amp meter, so this is going to be for your 1966 Mustang. We will not be using these wires with our installation. This wire here though, this is for your cigarette lighter. This has to be terminated. We're gonna put a terminal on this. And there's a stud on the back and a supplied nut to hold it on. So the two holes in the firewall we opened up earlier, this is for the second hole. This is the engine harness from the inside. This is going to come from the fuse block and from the gauge cluster out to the engine. Basically, you'll see there is a label on it, and there's two wires here as well. These are for your console. So if you do have a factory console, the console light in the front, this will power that, but all this gets fished back behind the dash, and this harness goes out to the engine bay. All right, now that we have this harness out here, same deal, take the firewall plate. And then grab the rubber grommet and same thing, fish everything through the grommet, put the grommet in the plate. All right, next wires we'll look at here, basically this red, yellow, and green. The green is gonna be your signal if you're running an aftermarket tachometer. We're not at this time, so we won't use that. The red and yellow, though, are for the radio. So we are gonna fish those up and leave these up here for when we install radio in the future. Like I said many times, the painless harness gives you all kinds of places to upgrade. This gray harness here, these 4 wires are going to be for air conditioning. If you're running, this will basically be the cooling fan to turn it on when the AC's on, the clutch control. All these we're not using now, but we might use them in the future. But again, we'll tie them up safely out of the way. All right, here's what we have left now under the dash. We have this group of wires here, which is for the hazard switch that our car is not equipped with. We'll probably add one, but we'll worry about that later. This is the flasher for the hazard. These wires here, this is going to be for our glove box light. These will be for the door jamb switch over on the passenger side. And then these 3 here are for the heater motor. We're going to connect these next. So these are gonna go up to basically the blower switch, which is located right here on the side of this panel. It's gonna be really hard for you guys to see. Now these are connected to the blower motor switch, which is basically right behind here on the side of it. You're gonna be looking at it towards the passenger side. You'll feel there's actually gonna be 3 studs there. The stud all the way on the left will be yellow, black and gray in the middle, and then brown. Now, the wiring we showed you for the heater is for the 2-speed heater. If you have a 3-speed heater, it'll have a blower resistor on the heater box. This harness will plug right into that, and these wires will connect to run the 3-speed. And the last connection is over here on the passenger side. Our courtesy lamp for under the dash. Let's get to fish that up through. All right, connect this to the bullet connector. And then we got 3 wires left. Courtesy light for the door. Again, we don't have them on our car. If you have a Pony interior car, you'll use this. And the last plug, fish it through here. Grab the door jamb switch. And ready to move on to the taillight wiring. Now we're ready to work on the rear harness. So on your way back on the harness, you'll see this 1 ground wire here. This is for your quarter lights. So if you have a fastback that has the lights in the back, that's gonna be for that. And the rest of this we're gonna follow to the back. This is gonna be wiring for our tail lights, wiring for their backup lights, wiring for the fuel sending unit. And there's actually an extra red and yellow in here. These are power wires basically for future accessories. At some point in time, we'll probably put an electric fuel pump on this car. So we're gonna run these wires to the back for now and just leave them back there. All right, to fish the harness to the trunk area, we're gonna remove our door sill plate first. Now here you can go in the factory location here if you want. I actually prefer to go under the carpet. Makes it a little bit easier. Especially when your videographer's not standing on your wires. Now we have the harness back here. We're going to separate out the yellow wire. This is for the sending unit. This will go through a hole over here on the passenger side floor. We're going to connect our taillight. Now for the taillight, you will need the factory pigtails if you do have the pigtail style lights. The colors again are the factory colors. So match up green to green, black to black, uses applied butt connectors. Now plug the taillight back in. And then connect this pigtail to the power wire for the backup light. And do the same thing on the passenger side. And don't forget in the middle, once you run the harness, plug in your license plate light. All right, so when we're working under the dash, this is the harness we fished out to the engine bay. And there's a bunch of different harnesses in here. Unfortunately with us, we don't have an engine, so some of these we're not gonna hook up right now, but if you've gotten this far, the rest of the connections are gonna be pretty straightforward. This harness here is gonna be for your neutral safety switch and your backup lights. That'll be 2 plugs on your transmission, so those will get fished down to the transmission. Brown and yellow here, go to your heater motor. This harness here, basically out to here, this is all gonna be your ignition coil wires, your tachometer wires, your gauge feed, your electric choke, and your idle solenoid. So all that's gonna be these 2 here. And the last main harness is this larger one here. This is the main power for the harness in the car. So this is gonna go over to the battery, basically via the starter solenoid. So this larger wire here with the yellow stripe, this is actually gonna go down to the alternator for power. And we got these left here. These are gonna connect between the starter solenoid and then a main fuse to go to the battery. Now we're gonna work on mounting the main fuse for the wiring harness. This is basically how it's gonna come together. One's gonna go on each side of this. If you do have an ammeter on the car, if it's a 66, this red wire will also continue to this. We're not using it, so we're not gonna connect that. These two connect like this, and then these three here will go over to the actual starter solenoid. Now here in YouTube land, we obviously do the same mistakes you guys make at home, and I got a little overzealous and broke the tab off this side. We'll fix it later. We're gonna put a washer on to hold it for now. Now we can make the connections. Not gonna install the fuse just yet, so just gonna throw these on finger tight for now. The other line then from the fuse goes over here to the battery cable side. Okay, now the red terminal over here, again, battery cable side. And then brown goes to the other side. So at this point, we're pretty much finished with the installation of our painless harness until we get an engine and trans back into our 65 Mustang. Now, of course, at this point, we have all the wiring laid out, we have all the connections made that we can do, but now honestly comes the tedious part. Go back through from front to back, hide the wires, clean up the connections, make sure if it's going over metal, there's a grommet in place. Obviously, this is very time consuming. We're not gonna show you that whole process, but take the time here. Make sure the wire is routed in a safe location. Make sure all the wires are tucked up out of the way so nothing becomes an issue in the future. And down the road, you'll be ready to enjoy your new painless harness.